So, in case you missed it, Vanity Fair just dropped the exclusive reveal of Tom Bombadil as a character who's making an appearance in season 2 of the Rings of Power. Now, this exclusive, which we're going to dive into here in a minute, we're going to go through the article, look at the photos and everything else. They're kind of making him out to be like a big deal in terms of the way they're doing this reveal, which I'm not quite sure what they're going to be doing with the character yet, because the reality is that Tom Bombadil has never been more than like a background character. He is, as Tolkien has described him in his letters, sort of like the personification of nature. And if you look at the way he's, in the Fellowship of the Ring, he's basically just a lore character who's been there since the beginning of time, right? And he's seen it all, he's experienced it all, and he's very eccentric in the Fellowship of the Ring. And the way he's being presented, at least in the photos that we've seen here, makes him seem more grounded, more down to earth. And the way that they are explaining how they're weaving him into the story has him out there sort of exploring, seeing what's going on. With the world at large as it changes. Now, we don't have a lot of information about Bombadil beyond what was presented in the Fellowship of the Ring. And of course, much like with a lot of the other things that they are doing for the Rings of Power, there's obviously a ton of imagination going on here, for better or for worse. And again, this isn't about whether you like it or love it. You don't know yet because you haven't seen it, and so you can't make a judgment call about whether or not this is going to be a good character or a bad character. I do know it's portrayed by an actor who I really appreciate and have seen a lot of over the years. We'll be getting into that here in a minute, but the big thing is that Tom Bombadil is going to be in season 2. I'm excited for that. I'm excited to see where they take the character. He's been cut out of the previous iterations because he's not a noteworthy character in the arc of the hobbits taking the ring to Mordor. He is a lore drop character. He's there to sort of get them out of a pickle when they're in the old forest, but he doesn't serve a greater purpose in the narrative. He's just there and then gone. And it's really cool to have him as part of the Legendarium that Tolkien slipped in there to sort of breathe more life into the world, but he has never been an important enough character to make it into a film translation because he's sort of background. And that's an important distinction between main characters like Gandalf and Aragorn and the hobbits. Anyway, I digress. Let's dive into this article a little bit and let's see what they have to say about the character. We do know from what I've seen that he's going to be showing up, I believe, with the enigmatic Gandalf-esque character that they brought around in season 1. So it says here, dun, 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 dun. He is going to show up in this show along with jolly songs and flamboyant wardrobe, which is good to know. That means they're going to be giving him some songs. And I did appreciate the songs from the first season. It was one of the areas where I said I felt like the songs from season 1 were some of the more Tolkien-esque parts of the show, especially the song when the Hobbit girls are when they're leaving and they're traveling and they're singing. I don't even remember the name of the song now because it's been a year, I guess, since we watched the show. Chris and I are going to be doing a rewatch of the Rings of Power season 1, by the way, in August, leading up to season 2 of Rings of Power. So make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you never miss an update when it comes to that. We're not going to be doing that until August, so it's still a little bit. Anyway, it says here, Bombadil is described in Tolkien's books as older than old, a benevolent entity who began life around the time all life began. So his existence in this earlier era, thousands of years before the events of the Lord of the Rings, this is where we get the creative liberty that they're taking. It at least fits within the canon established by the author. It says this is where J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay were looking about how he might show up in their show and why. They explain here there's a reason why he hasn't been in prior adaptations, because he's sort of an anadramatic character who doesn't have a strong agenda. He observes drama, but he doesn't participate in it. And when you have a character that's a secondary background character like that, you never really want them in the film because they don't bring anything to the table. He's just a lore drop. Says here, dun 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 dun. Yeah, we already know all that for those of you who have read. He said he could be a force for good, but it is challenging to integrate dramatically in a way that doesn't have an agenda. In that he doesn't have an agenda, he's not driving forward and pushing people to arrive at any particular end. Right. Dun, 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 dun. So I'm skimming through this here to see what they have. We have some really good screenshots though so far. And Rory, by the way, Rory is a really cool actor. Rory Kinnear. If you haven't seen him in anything before, I think the first thing I can remember seeing him from was probably Penny Dreadful when he played like Dr. Frankenstein and Frankenstein, I believe. And then also in that episode of Black Mirror he did where he was the prime minister who had to save lives or whatever by getting onto the pig. That was an interesting one. Um, Another good shot here. Obviously, he's much younger in these pictures than we've, the way he's described is sort of ageless, but also um, in the Fellowship of the Ring, you get the sense of age despite the fact that his appearance is ageless. And here, he definitely looks like a younger version, which would make sense given that he is, thousands of years younger at this point, which is a lot of fun. Let's see here. So, in this adaptation, the showrunner said we started thinking, what does he care about? How can that be a doorway to drama? We know he cares about the natural world. We know he's a helper. He's not going to push you, but he will help you. Traditionally lives in the place called the Withywindle, which is like an enchanted forest. They said here in the show they've taken the liberty of giving Bombadil a second home on the outskirts of Rune. It says here, Rune used to be Edenic and green and beautiful, but now it's sort of a dead wasteland. And we've put Tom here as he's gone out there to investigate to see what's happened as he goes on his various wanderings. So going back to sort of him being like the personification of nature, maybe roaming around and seeing what changes are happening in the world at large based on Sauron's meddling. It makes sense from a, painting within the lines sort of way, especially given that we know that that's sort of how they write their characters. They take lore and they just sort of build around it because they don't have the rights to the Silmarillion. And I don't remember Bombadil even showing up in the Silmarillion, if I have to be honest with you. If he does, it's just in a footnote. So Rune is where our halflings Nori and Poppy have gone with the stranger, aka Gandalf probably, who's trying to discover his purpose. Could be Saruman too, by the way. At the end of the first season, he did give off some major Gandalf signifiers here. Says here, expect Tom Bombadil to offer the stranger rare compassion in this otherwise merciless place. Payne explains, when he finally crosses paths with the stranger, you could say he has a desire to try to keep the destruction that has happened there from spreading to his beloved lands in the west. He nudges the stranger along his journey, which he knows will eventually protect the larger natural world. So I'd say our Tom Bombadil is slightly more interventionist than you see in the books, but perhaps by only 5 or 10%. It's interesting. Quick commercial break, everyone, to celebrate and give thanks to all of these amazing people who keep me on the air full time. Really appreciate the support. All you got to do is join as a member. You get access to private videos. You can also do super thanks on any upload or super chats and stickers on any live stream or premiere you see. And beyond that, don't forget we're multi-streaming over on Twitch now, so you can support over there as well. Thanks so much to everybody. Let's get back to the video at hand. He's played by Rory Kinnear, perhaps best known as M's chief of staff in the last 4 James Bond movie. I forgot about that. He was in the James Bond movies as well. Frankenstein's creature in Penny Dreadful, and the Prime Minister in Black Mirror. See, they even mentioned those things, which is where I remember him from as well. Most actors who take on a well-known genre character claim to be experts in the character. Kinnear, in his first interview, said he did not. He said he was a Lord of the Rings novice before signing on to the Rings of Power. And the quote here says, there are people who knew it from the books, people who knew it from the films, and there are those who had managed to get to 46 years old without knowing much about it. When he was offered the part, he says, I was honest, I hadn't read it. I said, I'll go away and read it and get back to you. I went downstairs to my partner who did know the books and does know the films, and I said, I've been offered this part. Apparently it's in the books. I got Tom Bombadil, and she freaked out and was like, no way, you're not playing Tom Bombadil. So I knew instantly that it had to be a cultural heft and that I was going to have to be sensitive to it. That's awesome. He said his partner, fellow Penny Dreadful actor Pandora Collin was simply surprised to hear that the show would feature Tom Bombadil. Because she was like, I can't believe it. He's my favorite character in all the books, but he's never shown up in any of the film adaptations for all the reasons we've been talking about. Peter Jackson said that the reason he left the character out was because he interrupts the story's son's request. He says, "What we did contemplate, and it was really for the fans, was to have the hobbits walking around the old forest and see a feathered cap come darting through the trees, to hear the sound of Tom Bombadil's voice and song, and then how the hobbits turn and run away as fast as they could. We thought that would acknowledge Tom in an affectionate joke kind of way, but we didn't have time to do it. Absence, it says here, has only made the heart of the Lord of the Rings fandom grow fonder from old Tom." I'll be the first to admit, um, I'm happy to see him in an adaptation. This is one area where I'm not going to nitpick the showrunners for wanting to include this. It's fan service, and there's nothing wrong with that if it can be done in a way that melds the story towards the Lord of the Rings narrative that we know and that everyone has the rights to produce. So taking somebody who doesn't have a lot of history is a footnote character that we can mention, but we can actually expand upon because not a lot has been written about him before the Lord of the Rings, before that, the Third Age. They have a lot of leeway to do stuff with, and it could be a lot of fun. Of course, we, obviously don't know how the character is going to be portrayed. I do like him as an actor, so I trust that whatever material he's given, he will bring his gravitas to the role. So Rory's performance is not the question that I have. The question I have is, how well did they create the character to integrate with the story that they've told? So, given the fact that he's going to be interacting with the hobbits and the stranger, this will be a really interesting, I would say, nature-esque character, which I think is going to be really cool. Sentiments of, let's see here. I'm reading something here. Dun, 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 dun. Having lived for millennia, he has learned and understood its deeper mysteries, and perhaps this is why he has now become the master, as he called himself by his wife and Goldberry, and why he is free from any control by the outside world, says Smith. Perhaps Tolkien intended Tom to remain forever a light in the darkness of troubled times, but ultimately he must remain a delightful enigma. There's nothing wrong with that. Kinnear says, "I was really interested to see how they were then going to process the character through the prism of their eyes and the way that they see the show developing. There's a sense of huge openness, experience, empathy, and having gone through so much, he knows it's the small things that are important, which felt quite domestic and reachable in terms of my understanding of who he was." That's really interesting. I wonder how they're going to do the wardrobe. I mean, they call it flamboyant, but I'm not seeing flamboyant in these pictures. Maybe in the first one. That's still not flamboyant, though. But maybe by the measures of the place they're going to be at, that could be. Here's the other major inspiration for Tom Bombadil. It says here, permanence of extreme age, more geological than biological. The question here was, how is he going to talk? There are lots of different dialects and accents going through the show, and I wanted him to be somewhat distinct from those, Kinnear said, but I also wanted to choose an accent that felt old, that was British, like an oldest part of Britain. Ooh, so he talks about inspiration from Cornwall, Table Mountain. Says, I worked with Leith McPherson, the dialect coach, on getting a Cornish accent together. Those are the first building blocks of the character. So it says here, as season 2 gets underway, Tom Bombadil offers aid and comfort, not just to the stranger, but also to the audience. So where season 1 sets the pieces on the chessboard, says Payne, in season 2 the pieces are in motion, and it's really about the villains. We've got Sauron, who's no longer cloaked. The audience knows he's Sauron, so now we're watching him maneuver as he's manipulating the Adar, as he's manipulating Adar, and Tom is a curiosity within that structure because while it is a darker season, Tom Bombadil's over here singing insane lines that would be nursery rhymes from children's poems, so he defies the tonal shift of the rest of the season as a point of light amidst an otherwise sea of darkness, which fits in with the theme of what Tom Bombadil is. So, Tom Bombadil finally getting a chance to be on screen. I'm excited for this. I think it's going to be fun. I can't wait to see it. Obviously, season 2 is a big question mark for people like myself. I reviewed the first season from two perspectives. One as a Tolkien fan, one as a fantasy fan with my wife, who has never read the books. Chris gave it an 8 out of 10 the first season. I gave it from a perspective of watching it as a fantasy show, I gave it a 7 out of 10. But from a Tolkien perspective, I gave it a 2 out of 10 because they played fast and loose with some stuff that I didn't think that they needed to go fast and loose with. But that's okay. It's their interpretation. It's their chance. It's their show. I fully, accept that they have the right to do whatever they want. If I was the showrunner, I guarantee people would criticize some of the decisions that I would make as well. So I'm just excited to see Tom Bombadil on the screen. I can't wait to see where they go with this character. And hopefully we're going to have a good time when season 2 rolls around this fall. Don't forget, I will be rewatching the show in August with Chris, and we'll be giving you some additional thoughts as we lead up to season 1. The coverage between now and then, it'll just be based on whatever coverage is coming out on the news, but I'm not going to be diving deep into it this year like we did with this first season when I was doing the Mondays in Middle Earth show, because we've wrapped that up. So this time around, covering the news as it happens, and of course the rewatch when we get closer to it, and then we'll see you there. Until next time, everybody, stay safe, happy watching and reading, and go learn more about Tom Bombadil. He's a really cool character.